Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the NFL Draft Headquarters podcast. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me tonight, my co-host, Justin Higdon. We're waiting to hear from Justis Mosqueda. Maybe he shows up tonight, maybe he doesn't. But Justin, welcome back from Florida. Hopefully you didn't have to suffer through a Browns game. Hopefully you were in flight during that. And you just got back, and now you can enjoy Monday Night Football, and it looks like the Bengals halfway through clinching a playoff spot.
The way my pro football team is doing, and my fantasy football team, I was tuning into the Saturday Night Live Christmas special earlier, so just kind of been steering clear tonight, waiting for these bowl games to start picking up.
Yeah, and that's how we'll start tonight. Looking at the weekend that was of the bowl games, obviously. Kind of the biggest thing happened in the bowl games this weekend was the the fight in the BYU versus Memphis game tonight at the Miami Beach Bowl or whatever they're calling that thing. But let's just get started and start with our week that was, and a couple guys that stood out, or you're still scratching your head and wondering, what does everybody see in this guy? And I'll start out tonight. Like I said, Justis isn't with us, so I'll do more prospect talk tonight. So bear with us, because your other expert's gone, so you'll get me tonight instead. And we'll start with a guy I've been talking a bit about, and that's Nate Orchard. We highlighted this matchup at the beginning of the season, or at the beginning of the bowl season, and talked about how we thought it could be the most intriguing one-on-one matchup of the bowl season, and I thought it was. I didn't watch the whole second half of the game. It was my son's birthday, so we turned it off, and I did the whole birthday thing with my son. But I got to watch the whole entire first half, every snap, and the thing I took away from it, and I tweeted this out, I thought Nate Orchard won in his matchup with Ty Morello, who is a guy that's going to be a day one, day two pick in the NFL draft. There's a lot of questions on this show, even by Justin and Justis, about Nate Orchard. What is he in the NFL? What can he be? What can he do? Justis has made the Nick Perry comparison, the linebacker out of USC that's with the Green Bay Packers. That's kind of been a okay player drafted at the end of round one. Justin, you've likened him, I think, to more of a defensive end that needs to put on some weight. Is that correct?
Yeah, I viewed him more as he doesn't have that lightning quick get off the snap. Kind of takes a more of a measured, calculated approach. I didn't get a chance to see the game this weekend, but he was always a solid run defender. A lot of sacks coming off effort. In that respect, he kind of reminded me of what I thought when I saw Demontre Moore coming out of Texas A&M, and I was like probably way higher on Demontre Moore than I could have been. So now, kind of even keel on Orchard. But the more I watch him, the more he does kind of grow on me. Just because he's just so successful at what he does. I mean, it's not flashy. He doesn't have that over the top athleticism or speed, but he just gets the job done. There's something to be said about guys like that.
Yeah, and I thought playing well against Sambrello was important, because like we've talked about a little bit, he's going to be a guy that gets a chance to be a early pick, whether that's day one or day two. So Orchard coming out and playing well was important. I was going to talk about a guy that didn't impress me, but I wanted to mention Devontae Booker of Utah, who just kind of continues to um, be a guy that you like more and more. You watch him run. He runs well behind his pads. He's a power guy, a guy in the box that can win. I think he's a guy that in the landscape of the NFL, especially with the success of a guy like Carlos Hyde, Jeremy Hill, Eddie Lacy, and kind of the split carries guys or even the 60-40 guys, that Booker has some real what's the word I'm looking for? He's a guy that is gonna be wanted if he does. Did he end up declaring like for real, or are we still just going off of Justis's report, which I take completely in stride? I think Justis is right on with all that stuff that he brings up. So, or has he declared for already?
I don't think so. I think we're still waiting for official word on Booker,
Okay.
but yeah, I do expect that Justis is going to be right on that one. And Booker will be like a one and done guy. He's just so productive. I'm still not sure what I think about him as far as where he's going to go, and I don't think he's going to be a guy that tests particularly well. But if you just look at the production 1 year with the rushing yards, he's a good receiving back too, and just that all-around kind of, like you said, runs behind his pads, picks up tough yards. Even if he doesn't really see all that well, he's still got some value with his all-around ability.
And then the one guy that I kind of set aside to watch and was slightly disappointed in, and he's a guy that our co-host Justice Mosqueda has kind of trumpeted a little bit. And again, it's not that he thinks super highly of him. He just thinks higher of him than the rest of this quarterback class, and that was Brandon Bridge. And against what you, I believe, just said was like one of the worst passing defenses in college football.
I'm trying to find it here, but I believe Bowling Green was second worst in the FBS in passing yards allowed.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things. Bridge is a project, but Logan Thomas got drafted, so it's not going to be impossible to see Brandon Bridge get drafted. And you just talk about the size, speed, athleticism aspect of what a guy brings to the table, and I think that's kind of what you'll see. What about for you this weekend?
Well, I was doing some traveling, but I got back in time on Saturday to catch Bridge. Just kind of, he was terrible in the first quarter. The game I wanted to talk about was a game I actually got to rewatch the next morning, and that was Louisiana Lafayette against Nevada. And some people were talking about Cody Fajardo as another quarterback to watch, and Fajardo we talked about him a little bit before. He's got an East-West Shrine game invite, and he just really had a hard time getting going. Nevada's whole offense really did, and big part of the reason was the two defensive linemen. I think I mentioned last week for Louisiana Lafayette. The Cajuns have two linemen, Christian Ringo, who I think set the school record for sacks on Saturday, for career sacks. He had over 10 on the season, I think 21 and a half in his career. And then his teammate along the line, Justin Hamilton, he's more of like a nose tackle projection at the next level. I find it interesting that Louisiana Lafayette rotates their line a lot. So there's a lot of plays and series where these two guys don't see a lot of action, but it keeps them fresh. Both really, really strong at the point of attack. Ringo's like an undersized guy. He's like 6'1", 280. so he probably projects more as like a situational inside pass rush guy. Hamilton, I think, could be a like a John Hughes type for the Browns, where he's a backup or maybe spot starter at nose tackle spot. But both these guys really impressed me with their strength, with their tenacity and getting pressure on the quarterback. And they were a problem for Fajardo and the rest of Nevada's offense. And they just really did a good job with shutting them down. I think Nevada only had 3 points in that game.
Yeah, and that was another kind of big game to see guys that a lot of people, myself included, don't get a chance to watch a ton of. So to see them come out and just play well and really dominate a a Nevada team that is pretty good offensively. That was important, and I think going forward, those guys, Ringo and oh gosh, the
Hamilton.
name just escaped me. Hamilton, thank you. Are going to start getting a little more notoriety, and that's what the bowl season's about. You can flash enough to make it where guys go back, especially internet guys, go back and watch you, as opposed to the NFL, which already knows, and we as the internet are just getting caught up on those guys. So anything else from this weekend's game? I know you're on vacation, so you're limited in what you got to watch.
Well, like I said, I got to check out South Alabama, Bowling Green. That was really my first look at Bowling Green. It was my fourth look at South Alabama. Nothing really stood out to me on the Bowling Green side. Bridge, as we mentioned, really struggled in the first half against what was statistically a pretty poor defense. He was able to rebound a little bit coming into the second half. And I actually saw a tweet where it said, "Where are the Brandon Bridge haters now?" Well, I'm still here. I'm still raising my hand. He's still not good. And he threw a couple picks, including one that sealed the loss. He threw another one that should have been picked, at least one other one. He just doesn't look like he has any feel for the game as a runner or a passer. He had a run, and you probably remember this. He had a clear line straight to the end zone, and he started to cut back all the way across the field. It was you had no idea how bad of a decision that was until they showed the overhead view a few minutes later, and it was like nobody would have touched him if he kept going. And I thought, this kid literally has no instinct as a passer or a runner. He's just an athlete, just out there kind of making some plays, and I just don't see what you're ever going to get out of a guy like that at the NFL level. But they did have a player on South Alabama who I hadn't looked at, and that was undersized linebacker Malik Harris. And that kid, 6'1", about 210, so he's built like a safety. I don't know where you play a guy like this, but he was in on a lot of plays on the defense for South Alabama side. And I hadn't known anything about him before, so that was a player I was interested to take another look at here down the road.
And that's exactly what we just talked about. That's what you want to do right now, is find guys that you want to watch and get a feel for before you go forward in this, because we're kind of all one-man operations. So we're trying to get caught up on these guys and find the gems out there. Going into this week's bowls, and we got a lot of bowl games to look over, so we're gonna go fast and furious. If we don't name every prospect on the team, it's not that we're ignoring him. It's just that there's a ton of games to look at, so it's kind of hard. Boca Raton Bowl tomorrow on the 23rd. You have Marshall versus Northern Illinois. For me, this is going to be an interesting game for Rakeem Cato, because he's a guy you and I have talked about quite a bit in terms of, can he be a NFL quarterback prospect I saw it today. Somebody talked about he's kind of like Kellen Moore, and I like that comparison. Um, it's interesting because Moore is still in the NFL, and still a back in the league. So he obviously has never gotten a chance to play, but he's also been a guy that's stuck around the NFL. So I think you can watch him and kind of get an idea of, is he going to be a guy that can play in the NFL?
Yeah, I'm not sold on the Moore comparison in that Moore was so much of an anticipation passer and just accurate underneath passer. But I get the size comparisons there. But I've seen Cato quite a few times, and he just really doesn't have any accuracy. He throws to spots deep down the field, and sometimes that'll work. And he's obviously such a prolific college passer. I think he's like 7th all time in NCAA passing yards for his career. So he's a really, really good college player. He's going to go out as one of the most prolific in FBS history. I don't know that he'll stick around, but like you said, Moore, I remember people talking about Kellen Moore when he was coming out and basically making fun of anybody who thought he could play in the NFL. Um, you know, some people got pretty nasty about it, if I recall. And here Kellen Moore is still on an NFL roster. So I'm not going to say never with Cato, but I will say I don't think he's going to get drafted. But he's definitely a fun guy to watch in college, and it'll be one last chance for people to get to enjoy him. And I do think he could stick around, maybe play some arena football or Canadian football. I think you'll hear his name again down the road.
The other guy from Marshall, quickly, and I don't know if you've watched him, but it's James Rouse. He plays at nose tackle, but he's listed like 275. Wondering if he has any future as a possible interior pass rusher in just situational pass rushing, because he's 6'5", so he's a tall guy, but he wins with quickness from the inside as opposed to but he doesn't look like he has the ability or strength to play kind of a 5 technique or pure defensive end position. Have you watched him at all?
Yeah, I like Rouse. I think he's the best. I think he'll be the best draft eligible player for Marshall to come out this year. The best senior prospect that they have. Really productive run stopper, has like 25 tackles for loss in his career, and he gets a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Doesn't really finish, but I do like him. And I think what you said, as a situational player, a rotational player, a late round guy, or maybe you can put some weight on him. I think there's something there with Rouse. I like him.
From the Northern Illinois side, I think everybody's top prospect for Northern Illinois is their free safety, and I'm going to butcher his name, but Deshane Durante. Is that how we are pronouncing? I have no idea, to be honest with you.
Sounds good to me.
But have you watched Durante at all? I remember watching him while watching Jimmy Ward, but I didn't realize, I guess, how thin he was. He looks bigger than 190 pounds at 6'2".
Yeah, I wrote this in my my little draft, or my little bowl preview for Draft Browns, but I haven't watched any Northern Illinois. I think they played the MAC championship, and I didn't watch that because I was watching the Pac-12 championship that night. But I do know that he has 11 career interceptions, and that he's considered a late round prospect. Other than that, this would be my first chance to look at him. Anytime you've got a defensive back, we've talked about how tough it is when they're out of the screen, but you like to see a player like that play against a prolific quarterback and see if he can get his hands on the ball, because I think that is telling. I like defensive backs that are productive with pass breakups and interceptions.
The anybody else from the Boca Raton Bowl?
There's a couple of offensive players in Northern Illinois. Cameron Stingley, receiver Deron Brown. I haven't got a chance to look at them, but those guys have been their most productive offensive players. And then on Marshall, you got running back Devon Johnson. He's a big fullback type. I think he even started as a linebacker. He's been banged up with his shoulder, so I don't know if he's going to play or not. But he was either the leader or second in the FBS in yards per carry this year, like 8.6 yards per carry.
Going to the Poinsettia Bowl, excuse me, and this is a fun little matchup. Obviously, we have another service academy in Navy in this game. Again, this is just a really hard one to break down because with a Navy or Army or Air Force, like we talked about before, they have their service commitments, so it's just hard to know what's going to happen. I've heard their long snapper Joe Cardona would get a look once he comes back off his commitment from Navy, but really the only prospect, I should say only prospect, but the prospect to watch in this game is Terry Poole from San Diego State. He's an offensive tackle. Again, it's another one of those weird games where you don't have a ton of guys to watch, but it's a fun game to watch and being matchup of contrasting styles.
Yeah, I have had a chance to watch Terry Poole in one game, and I believe they were playing Hawaii. And the takeaway I had from that was that Terry Poole is one of these offensive linemen who likes to engage in a block and then check over his shoulder to see where the ball is. He did it frequently during that game, and it was just aggravating because I can just imagine coaches just screaming at him to sustain. And then, I think I tweeted it while I was watching, but I want an offensive lineman who's going to sustain the block until he hears a whistle, and then I will let him know how the play went. I don't want him trying to check it out over his shoulder. It's just not an effective way, and I think it's a horrible habit. So I'd like to see Poole improve on that. Hopefully that was just a fluky thing that I saw. But he does have a Shrine Game invite too, so he'll get a chance to impress some people in All-Star Game practice.
Anybody else on this San Diego State roster? And again, that's not taking anything away from Navy. It's just very rare that any of those guys are serious NFL prospects.
Yeah, Cardona, you mentioned him. He's the Navy long snapper. He does have a Senior Bowl invite. We've also got wide receiver Izell Ruffin from San Diego State. He's another Shrine Game invitee. Missed some time with a broken collarbone earlier this year. Cornerback J.J. Whitaker for San Diego State's another guy you might want to keep an eye on. He has 5 career interceptions.
The bowl game I would want to go to if I wasn't in a top bowl game, the Bahamas Bowl. And this is Central Michigan for Kentucky. Again, this is a fun game. You have Central Michigan, who has some interesting prospects. I think the top guy is Titus Davis, wide receiver. Missed a lot of time this year with an injury to his knee, but he still put up really big numbers. I think he finished with 843 yards, 9 touchdowns, despite missing 3 games. He's got some talent on the offensive side of the ball for Central Michigan. Anybody else that you've seen, or do you have any comment on?
On Central Michigan, they've got running back Thomas Rawls, who's a Michigan transfer, and this is a guy who rushed for over 1,000 yards in only 9 games. I got a chance to see him while he was at Michigan, kind of tough inside runner, but this is a player who has a lot of off-the-field issues throughout his career, so I doubt he's a draftable guy at this point. But he was productive for them.
On the side of the ball for another East-West Shrine game invite is Latarius Walton. I have not seen anything on him. Have you watched him at all?
Nope. That's the first I've heard him news that he's a Shrine Game invitee. We lost you for a second there, buddy.
Oh, sorry. Did you did you hear me talk about Cam Thomas at all?
No, I did not, but
Okay.
I do think this is a good matchup for him with Titus Davis. If they do get matched up, he's a tall corner, 6'1", 190. What have you seen out of him? I haven't really seen a ton of Western Kentucky this year, but I did get a chance to see him make some plays against Marshall.
No, I mean that's kind of he's the new breed of corner for the NFL. Long, lanky, 6'1", almost 200 pounds. He wasn't thrown at hardly at all this season, and I think that the opportunity to see a tall, lanky corner like Thomas versus a tall, lanky receiver like Davis could be an interesting thing in terms of just being able to see them go against top prospects or top talent against each other. How much of this can you take? How much can you take away from one game where these guys play against each other?
With some guys like this from some outside schools, I think you can take a little bit more than players that have consistent week-to-week matchups, because guys will slump. But like you said, Thomas is a guy who wasn't barely tested this year after picking off 8 passes the previous 2 years combined. So that he can get his hands on the football, but when teams don't go after him, I saw Cato when they played Marshall test him, I think like 1 or 2 times, and he made plays on the ball. The one thing I will say about Cam Thomas, though, is he made one of the weakest tackling attempts that I've seen all season. I wrote in capital letters in my notes that day, weak. He tried to throw a shoulder at the, I forget if it was at the running back or quarterback, and he just completely whiffed. It was just really poor attempt. So I'd like to see if he can tackle, but it's not the most crucial skill for a corner.
When you look at Cam Thomas, he's a guy with another Shrine Game invitee. Is he one of the guys you're watching at the Shrine Game that you are kind of thinking could get the Pierre Desir treatment, be one of the call-ups to the Senior Bowl this year?
Yeah, you're always looking at players like that who, Desir was a little different because he's coming all the way from the Division II ranks. It was really interesting to me last year when he was at the Shrine Game and how many people became so high on him all of a sudden. And then you see he didn't really start to play. He ended up being a 4th-round pick, didn't really start to play until about a week or two ago for the Browns. I think Cam Thomas has a shot to be that type of player that gets a call-up from the Shrine Game with a big, strong week. But then because he plays at an FBS level, he's got potential to probably even be drafted higher, especially if he runs well in the pre-draft process. So this is a good matchup for him. A prolific receiver, a guy who's been really productive, facing him, and he probably doesn't see a ton of that, and then he gets to carry this into the All-Star game if he has a good showing. So that's a good combination if you can make it work.
Have you seen anything on the offensive tackle that has accepted an invite, Cameron Clemens?
I did not watch Cameron Clemens as far as, taking detailed notes on him while I was watching Western Kentucky. I was focusing on their quarterback, Brandon Doty, who it looks like now is taking a medical red shirt and will be back in school next year. But I can tell you that they gave Doty good protection across the line in that game against Marshall, enough so that he was able to throw 8 touchdown passes. So that's a player I'm going to keep an eye on in this matchup, because I want to see just, now that I know Doty's probably coming back, I can focus more along the line in a singular viewing and see how things are going up front.
The other great bowl game, if you're in a non-big bowl, the Hawaii Bowl, who wouldn't want to spend Christmas Eve in Hawaii or the Bahamas, right? I mean, as a college kid, that would be fantastic.
I would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, sorry, Mom and Dad.
Yeah. Fresno State versus Rice. Fresno State has 2 big-time prospects, and you could throw a third in there probably, but 2 guys that have Senior Bowl invites. The first one's the safety, Deron Smith. Everybody, again, that's involved in the draft Twitter industry is aware of Deron. What are your thoughts on him? How much have you watched?
Well, his production has dipped, since heading into 2014. I think he had 13 picks in the 2 years before that, but he was a guy who tested the waters in the NFL draft advisory board last year. Apparently didn't get a top 3 round grade, and that's what brought him back. So then he comes back. He has a less productive season, but that's okay because people still remembered what a talented player he was the previous 2 years. So now he's got a Senior Bowl invite, and he's got a decent test with Rice. I mean, their quarterback's not great, but they do have some talent at the receiver position. We'll talk about in a second. But I think Smith is currently projected as a day 2 player. And safeties, we've seen safeties rise with late surges and good all-star performances, and then strong combine showing. So Smith is a player who can, again, like Thomas, kind of use this as a springboard to carry him into the all-star game and through the pre-draft season. If he runs well and has a couple good performances, it's going to carry him a long way, especially because we know he has a history of production.
Josh Harper's the other big-time Fresno State prospect, a wide receiver. This is a group that's really hard to kind of gauge. Devontae Adams has played well in spurts this year. What do you make of Josh Harper?
Harper's a pretty thin guy, and I think he's going to project as a slot receiver at the next level, kind of like a poor man's Shard Green, the Florida State receiver. I don't think he's quite the route runner with the quickness that Green has. But again, I haven't seen as much of Harper as I have of Green. So, there's more to watch there. This is a good chance for me to see him in some action. So I know that he's been incredibly productive, 20 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. I don't see a guy like that with his build carrying it over into the NFL. But he definitely has some people talking. I know some people like him as early as late day 2, just based on what little I've seen and his build in general, and coming from what the competition level. He's going to need some strong off-season performances to get him that high into the day 2 range, because I think receivers, again, one of the deeper positions, especially once these underclassmen start coming out. My first impression of him was like 4th, 5th round. So we'll see if he can, come up big in this game. They've got a couple of defensive backs on Rice's side that could give him some trouble. It'll be interesting.
Rice does have a couple Shrine Game invitees. We'll get to the bigger prospect literally next, but Bryce Callahan, have you watched anything on him?
Yeah, Callahan is he's projects to probably be in a slot corner. I've seen him do some pretty good things covering down the field. Just one interception this year. He had another interception that I saw, which was really impressive, where he tracked the ball down the field and laid out, kind of looking like an outfielder, almost like Jim Edmonds in baseball, making one of these diving catches, sprawling, landing on his back. It got called back for some kind of defensive penalty, so it didn't count. The one thing that I would not want to do with Callahan is have him return punts. I've just seen him make too many questionable decisions returning punts for Rice. I think he's a late round slot corner type of player. He's going to need to run well. Players like him sometimes go undrafted, but then catch on because they can play some special teams or they can run a little bit. Currently, a guy I might compare him to is what the Browns got an undrafted rookie, Kawan Williams. I'm not sure, a lot of people saw Kawan Williams in college last year, but if Callahan can run like that, like Williams did, then he's got a chance to maybe make some plays and come up a little bigger than maybe people think he is.
And kind of the new breed of wide receiver prospect, Jordan Taylor, 6'5", 210 pounds. Is he anything more than a day 3 athlete that you're going to draft and try to see if you can make him a red zone target?
I like Jordan Taylor a lot. He's made some. I mentioned Rice's quarterback is not the best passer, so Taylor has had to make some really crazy catches, adjusting to the ball in the air, twisting his body around, and catching the ball out in front and away from his body. And for a guy that's 6'5" and 220, that's just not easy to show that type of agility and that type of athleticism. So he's a fast guy. He can jump. He's got good hands. I think he can be a riser in this pre-draft process. I do think he'll test well. He's a player. The one thing I wonder about is he's missed some time both this season and I think his freshman season with injuries, some prolonged like 3 and 4 game stretches of time. So it'd be interesting. Maybe his medicals, stuff that we don't get, stuff that we're not privy to, could end up holding him back. But just on the field product and what I think he's going to test, I think he could be a riser into. He's a player I think could sneak into the later part of day 2 and the early part of day 3.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is a new era of drafting wide receivers because of how prolific passing games in the NFL are. You need different types of weapons wide receiver, and you look at your Cleveland Browns, for instance, and how bad they need a big wide receiver like a player like Taylor, and you wonder, where can those guys come in and get playing time at? And obviously we see it in Denver, and there's a couple other places that are not, I can't think of off the top of my head, but of wide receivers that come in that are picked early and really don't do anything for the first couple of years before breaking out later on. So it's a different time in the draft world, so to speak. Moving on to the Heart of Dallas Bowl, maybe the worst game for prospects. Illinois, I don't know if they. Honestly, I don't know if anybody would be drafted out of this game unless an underclassman declares. Do you have any prospects you're wanting to watch in this game?
For Illinois, I do not. I don't think they have a draftable prospect on that team. For Louisiana Tech, I got a couple for you. Cornerback Lavander Liggins is a player I got a little bit of a glimpse on a a glimpse at in the Conference USA Championship game. But the player that I was most impressed with in that game on Louisiana Tech was junior running back Kenneth Dixon. He is a really good player. If he happens to declare for the draft, he's a player I do think could rise into that middle round range, 4th and 5th, surpass some of these seniors that people have been talking about. I thought for a second that I should take a look at Louisiana Tech quarterback Cody Sokol. He's an Iowa transfer. He was so bad in the Conference USA Championship game. I don't think there's any chance of him getting drafted. So it was almost like fool's gold. I saw him in one game where he threw for almost 400 yards, and then the next game he just couldn't hit the broadside of the barn. So really look at Liggins and Kenneth Dixon, and then you can move on to the next game.
The one thing I'll say, and the guy I was going to bring up, so I'm glad you brought him up, because we've talked about it before. If you're a running back and you're going to get drafted at this point, it might be worth it to go, just because of the number of carries that you take in college, especially at Louisiana Tech where you run the ball so much, that you're going to take more hits, so you're more likely to take an injury, unfortunately. But Louisiana Tech has an offensive tackle by the name of Mitchell Bell, who's like just a refrigerator with arms and legs. They list him at only 354 pounds. If he's under 360, that's impressive. But he's only like 6'2". So he's going to play guard in the NFL if he makes an NFL roster. He has an NFLPA invite, so it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, he's just a massive, massive man, and he could end up being one of those guys that you see gets picked late in the draft or picked up off of priority free agency, and then all of a sudden you hear his name about how he's just moving people in camp, because he's literally one of the biggest individuals I've ever seen just on the football field, on the offensive line. So, just watch, just a name to watch, something else to watch in that game, because
if you told me about a 6'2", 360-pound guy, I would tell you to move him to nose tackle.
Yeah, he moves pretty well. So yeah, just watch him. It'll be interesting to see what happens. And he's a guy that they'll run behind a lot, so you can watch him while you're watching Dixon score, probably get to 3 touchdowns on the season. So Dixon's a really good ball player. I just didn't. It's so hard to decide whether or not these guys are going to go out. So next game, the Quick Lane Bowl. I couldn't even tell you where this bowl is being played anymore, to be honest. But North Carolina and Rutgers. 2 named schools that don't have a ton of named players this year. Do you want to start with North Carolina or Rutgers on this one?
I'll start with Rutgers, because there's only one guy I would really that really piques my interest, and that's Leonte Carew, the wide receiver. He's a junior. It sounds like he's planning on coming back for his senior season, but you never know what a really big bowl game could do. Carew averaged almost 20 yards a catch, 10 TDs in this Rutgers' first year in the Big Ten. So, that's something to look out for going forward. And he's coming from a school that's produced some NFL receivers recently. But other than that, I have not focused on Rutgers. I have seen Rutgers play several games this year in the Big Ten, and a couple of them they just got smoked, got blown out of water. So I don't want anyone to think like Gary Nova is an NFL prospect or anything like that. Carew's the one guy that I have hope for.
Yeah, I actually don't mind their tight end, but he's also a junior. Croft, I think his name is. He's a big dude. I think I wrote down he's like 6'6", 240. But again, it's really hard to gauge their receiving weapons because of how bad Nova is. North Carolina, same type of thing. I don't know if they have anybody that's really tackle this year. They have a linebacker with the last name Otis. I honestly, I don't remember much about him. So, do you have anything?
They have, Norkeithus Otis and Travis Hughes are the two senior linebackers. But really, I watched Notre Dame against UNC, and that game didn't really tell me much. I know UNC has a cornerback, Tim Scott, who some people like. Other than that, you're looking at some underclassmen guys. Receiver Quinshaw Davis, and I think they have a guard, and his name escapes me right now. But North Carolina hasn't been really high on my list of teams to watch. And you mentioned not knowing where this bowl is played. The Quick Lane Bowl is played in Detroit, Michigan. So you've got some teams going to the Bahamas and Hawaii, and then you got these two teams going to Detroit. So I do recommend they check out the Motor City Casino out there. Grab a couple of drinks and have some fun and wind down after the game.
Oh, geez. St. Petersburg Bowl, North Carolina State versus Central Florida. Start with Central Florida. Probably the biggest name and a guy that looks like he's going to have a chance to play a little safety in the NFL is Clayton Geathers. Like I said, he's a good size, 6'2", has some room to put on weight, only at 210. He's been impressive the last couple of years. I mean, he's not a guy that is going to wow you, but it's really hard to tell a whole lot about these guys from the feed that we are able to get. So, but he's a guy that, I mean, he lays some licks while he's out there. So that's one of the things that gets you noticed as a safety in the draft Twitter realm is if you hit. So that's one guy for UCF, and the other guy is Terrence Plummer. I think he's the inside linebacker. Excuse me. He's undersized. I think every inside linebacker in college football in Florida is undersized at this point.
Yep.
But he's a guy that he's always around the ball. I have a feeling he's going to stick on a 53. I don't know if he's going to be a guy that plays a ton, but I think with the way he's around the ball all the time, he'll probably get drafted or be picked up in priority free agency, and then be a guy that ends up hanging around for a while.
Yeah, and the guy that really intrigues me on Central Florida, and just hearing some whispers that he might be on his way out on the early side, is receiver Brashad Perriman. And we might remember his father, Brett Perriman, playing in the NFL, also a receiver. Brashad Perriman is just a super productive on limited catches throughout the last 2 years. Last year with Bortles, averaged about 21 yards a catch. This year, about 22 yards a catch, almost 1,000 yards in 12 games, and he has 9 touchdowns. He's a big dude, 6'2", 210. Got that NFL pedigree, so that's a name I would not be at all surprised to hear on the early declaration list.
On the other side, North Carolina State, a couple interesting prospects in this one. Do you want to go first on this one?
I just wanted to ask you if you remembered when Jacoby Brissett was a top 10 quarterback in this draft, if you remembered that brief couple weeks earlier in the season.
Oh, I didn't know if that you were talking about when he played at Florida or not. No, I don't remember that. But that's
he had a huge game against Florida State statistically, and then just a string of some really ugly games. And I saw him on some top 10 lists, and that was probably hot takes from the past. But Brissett was the one name that really I know. They've got some other guys. I know defensive lineman Thomas Teal, offensive lineman Rob Crisp. I think Crisp has some buzz around him, but I really I haven't got a chance to watch much NC State myself.
And honestly, the best prospect for them might be their punter. Have you seen him play at all?
I don't think they punted against Florida State, and that's probably the only NC State game I've seen all year.
He's 6'6".
Is he Australian?
So,
Because that's important these days.
I know now all of a sudden it's important. But yeah, he's a guy. I don't know if he's going to any games or anything, but yeah, he's a guy to watch for in this upcoming draft process, because I think he might end up being looked at by some teams because of you know, how important it is to change field position, especially against good teams. I mean, you see what Seattle did last night to Arizona, and the ability to change field position really matters. The Military Bowl. This one's in Annapolis, Maryland. Who wants to go to Maryland in December? Is my question.
It just
I'm sorry. Say again.
I said just doesn't seem fair.
No, I know, especially when you get the Bahamas and the Hawaii Bowl. So
And these
Cincinnati,
teams, I mean, Cincinnati won 9 games, and they don't get to go to the Bahamas? Come on.
yeah, Cincinnati, and yeah, that should be it. If you win a lot of games, you should go to a bowl in the southern hemisphere of
Exactly.
or the southern part of America. I know the Bahamas isn't America, but still, I mean, come on. But yeah, the Military Bowl in Annapolis, Maryland, Cincinnati versus Virginia Tech. Another interesting game in terms of the lack of like name talent on these teams. Let's start with Cincinnati. Gunnar Kiel, I think, is going to be a guy a lot of people watch because of how bad the quarterback class is this year. I don't see any way he comes out. Do you?
No, he's a redshirt sophomore. He's a multiple transfer player. He's on his third school, right? And he's a redshirt sophomore.
Yeah, LSU, Notre Dame to Cincinnati.
Okay, yeah. So he's been around and around already. I think he's got another year at least before he's going to venture out. Beyond that, with Cincinnati, I know some people like their tackle Eric Lefeld. I saw a little bit of linebacker Jeff Luke, and he was a player that stood out to me in a little bit of Cincinnati that I saw. Kind of a shorter guy, but a big guy. Looks like a run stopper, special teamer. Probably doesn't run that well. He's a transfer. I forget where from, but beyond that, Cincinnati was a team that I saw some talented underclassmen. They look like they'll be tough down the road, but didn't have a lot of draftable talent coming into this year.
In the same vein, Virginia Tech. Maybe their safety Dietrich Bonner, not a bad prospect. Both of their, I think they play. I'm going to butcher his first name. Keyshawn, is it Keyshawn? Jarrett. He plays more like a rover position, but I mean they're not as good as they normally are this year.
No, they had the biggest upset that ended up meaning nothing later in the year. Obviously, they beat Ohio State, who made it into the Final Four playoff. But they had a couple players. They had an offensive tackle, Brent Benedict. I think he retired because of injury, and then they had a defensive lineman in Luther Maddie, who is also out. So really, and they just had a ton of injuries. I don't think they have a lot of draftable players. They have some young defensive backs. They always produce some really talented defensive backs to watch for next year, the year after. But really, this game, Annapolis, a couple of teams with not a lot of draft prospects, might be a good time to make a liquor store run or something like that.
Exactly, because the next game is teaming with talent at the wide receiver position. Oh wait, the Sun Bowl, ASU versus Duke. Jalen Strong. We joked about him on Twitter today a little bit.
Yep.
He's a late day one, early day two prospect at the wide receiver position. Even if other people don't agree, he's a guy that he makes a lot of plays in the passing game. He's got a big catch radius. Despite some murmur on Twitter, he is good. He is good using his hands to catch the ball, and he makes plays. He's not afraid to make plays with the ball in the air. His ball skills aren't bad, as I don't think. I mean, maybe, I don't know.
No,
I don't think so. I've always said he needs to work on his route running. He has to catch the ball contested too much. And in the NFL, I think that's going to be his one issue, is he's going to have to learn how to create a little bit of separation. So a contested catch is still a contested catch versus a pass breakup in the NFL, where DBs have the ability to close and break on the play. So that's the one thing with Jalen. I think he's the best prospect in this game on either side. I don't think you'll disagree with that, will you?
No, I'm a big Jalen Strong guy, and I've defended him on this show and in articles all year. I think he's a good player. He makes some ridiculous catches. Yeah, he does get caught in tight coverage, but he's one of those guys where he'll have 8 catches and 110 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then somebody will break up a Taylor Kelly pass late in the game, and the Twitter will chime in with, see, he can't get separation. Well, you can't get separation every single damn time, but he does make a ton of plays. He's played through injury. I just think he's a tough player, and I think he's going to be I think he's going to be early day 2 pick. I think he'll fall out of the first round, but it wouldn't surprise me if he sneaks in, especially if he tests well. But the thing I'm looking forward to the most in this game is my guy Marcus Hardison, who came out of nowhere this year. Awesome guy, awesome defensive lineman, versatile, can play inside out. Big 6'4", 6'5", 300-pounder. Lots of sacks, lots of batted passes this year, and he's going to face a couple of touted Duke linemen in tackle Tacoby Caulfield and Laken Tomlinson, the guard. So this is a good matchup for people like us that like to watch the big uglies, duke it out and see who comes out on top. I think Hardison's got a chance to really shine in this game.
Yep, and of course, Tomlinson might be the best prospect on the Duke side. They have some interesting prospects. Jamison Crowder is a wide receiver who's made some plays quite a bit. Small guy, though, 5'9", 170 pounds. So it's going to be interesting to see what he's able to do against the ASU defense that is pretty generous a lot of the time in their coverage.
Yes.
So he could have a huge game and kind of really set himself up. He's going to the Senior Bowl. The best defensive player in the secondary for ASU's Demarius Randall, a guy I talked about preseason and what he can kind of do. He plays at the safety position, but he'll play up near the line of scrimmage too. Very physical for being only 5'11" and 190 pounds. So he's another guy to watch in this game. And I don't know, if you want to watch Taylor Kelly, you're more than welcome to. I'm done with him at ASU. So I'm kind of glad that Taylor Kelly era is over. I will mention one other, and I'll let you talk about him because we've talked about him numerous times via text message. But Jamil Douglas is a tackle at ASU, and he's probably going to get move to guard. The Shrine game has him listed as a guard. He's a guy with athleticism to spare. I just don't know if he knows how to use it yet. So he's the guy to watch in these the Shrine game, because he's a guy that with his size and speed could make a name for himself, but with how raw he is as a technician, he could absolutely get embarrassed at the Shrine game as well. So he's kind of a boom or bust prospect at the Shrine game, and going against Duke, and they don't have a ton of talented passers or defensive players, so it'll be interesting what he does there.
Yeah, Douglas, like you said, he's kind of Jekyll and Hyde. I remember texting you one game, like, who's this guy playing left tackle? I heard he's a former tight end. He looks pretty good. And then the next game, he's doing what I talked about earlier. He's not sustaining his blocks because he's too interested in what's going on behind him. And that's a good way to get your running back and your quarterback hung out to dry. But then I've seen him later in the season having another good game. So I want to see consistency out of him. Like I said, former tight end, so he's probably new to this position, and now people talking about putting him in an even newer position. So he's been bounced around. I'd like to see him get a chance to stay put. Probably a late round prospect, but with potential to move up with some good athletic testing.
Moving on to the Independence Bowl, and we're just going to start rolling through these because we're already over an hour into the show. Miami versus South Carolina. The Denzel Perryman hot takes are going to be amazing. I think that'll probably be the best thing to watch on Twitter that day. But outside of that, I mean, Miami's stocked with talent. It's weird that they're not very good. But you kind of look at it. You've got a number of Shrine Game invites. Shane McDermott and John Feliciano on the offensive line for Miami, and then defensively, I'm going through it again just to make sure. I don't think they have anybody on defense at the Shrine Game. And then they have Philip Dorsett, wide receiver, who's really intriguing because he's supposedly like the fastest player that they've ever produced. Isn't that kind of what they said?
That's hard to believe. I mean, considering what they've come up with throughout the history of the U.
Yeah, and then you have on defense Ladarius Gunter and then Denzel Perryman. So there's a lot of talent on this this Miami team. They just never really put it together all season. Who can show the most? I know you and I are both really high on Duke Johnson, so let's take Duke out of it for a second. Who can show the most and kind of help quell concerns the most in this game?
I think Mike Davis on South Carolina on the offensive side. Mike Davis maybe lost some luster during the season. This is a good chance for him to gain some back because he's expected to declare for the draft. And the offensive line, Corey Robinson, who I probably like a little bit more than other people, but I think he's so big and strong on the offensive line. This is a pretty solid defense for him. To test him, see if maybe he can stay at tackle. I don't think he's going to stay at left tackle, but maybe right tackle. He might be too tall for guard, but you do see a couple tall guards. I think this is a big game for Corey Robinson. I'm hoping for good things out of him.
What are your thoughts on Eric Flowers? Because I think I saw him projected to go like 12 overall in a mock draft the other day.
Wow, I would have never guessed that. I mean, he's had some injury issues. It's always good for a player to who's had injury issues to show up in a game like this and perform well. But wow, I think sometimes some of these offensive linemen, you're looking already at mock drafts trying to project surprise picks. So it's December still.
Yeah, last one on this game. AJ Cann, is he the best interior lineman in this draft?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Oh, it's okay. Is AJ Cann the best interior lineman in this draft?
I think if you're looking at a power run game, then yes. I think if you're looking at a zone blocking scheme, you're looking at moving a guy like Scherf or maybe Sombrello to guard, and then they become more your cup of tea, like what we see with Joel Bitonio or even a Zach Martin, more athletic guys moving inside. But Can is a powerful guy, and the two that left side of the line with Can and Robinson can really help a team that runs more of a power game. I think both of those guys have NFL futures.
In the bowl in New York, Boston College versus Penn State. Good to see Penn State back in the bowl. Bill O'Brien really did a nice job kind of restoring some order to the chaos there. And then James Franklin, I don't know if he's completely ruined it already or what, but they've at least, created some stability there from an institutional standpoint. As far as prospect goes, um, Penn State's always got some, but I'm torn. I like Adrian Amos the best. Um, what do you think of who's the top prospect for Penn State in this game?
I know people like their edge player Deion Barnes, and I don't know if I think he's a redshirt sophomore, possibly junior. I can't remember off the top of my head, but Barnes is a player who I think started really slow this year and came on as the season went on. Amos is a good one, and Mike Hall is a player who has obviously made an impression on NFL people, because I think he got a Senior Bowl invite, and he's an undersized linebacker, but he is a tackle machine, and Penn State just carries that reputation of being able to produce good linebackers who can have long careers in the NFL, and a player like Mike Hall does benefit. So he and
Mike
Amos,
Hall,
yeah, indeed,
yeah.
they both have Senior Bowl invites.
Yep. And Mike Hall was the other guy. Um, Undersized, scrappy inside or linebacker from Penn State.
Yep.
He's going to be a special teamer, but Penn State guys always seem to get drafted. So is that something that we'll probably just continue to see?
I think it's looking that way. When he got a Senior Bowl invite, I was kind of thinking he was more of a shrine game type prospect. I know you have to fill rosters, and there's more at play than just how these guys are viewed by the NFL. But I think Hull, in a really tough game against Ohio State where they went into overtime and lost, Hull had a huge performance in that game. And when you have a player like that who maybe isn't too high on your list, but then he really shows out in a big game against a good team, that will cause you to open your eyes and maybe take a second look at him. And I think people saw enough production out of him in the run game to take him seriously as a prospect.
Boston College has Andy Galick, maybe the best center prospect in the draft. I know we're already putting Cam Irving up there to a lot of people, but Galick's been really good this year. Do they have anybody else?
They've got an offensive lineman named Ian Silberman, and he's a transfer. I think he was from Florida, but he's been playing right tackle for them. I know Draft Breakdown has a cut-up of him. Didn't strike me as a prospect till I saw him on their video board, but he looks like a tall, lean, athletic type, developmental type. So those two guys, you're looking at offensive line. Their quarterback, Murphy, some people think maybe he could be a like Denard Robinson shift to running back, but I don't think he's that shifty of a runner. So I don't think he's an NFL player.
The Holiday Bowl might be one of the better prospect watching matchups. Nebraska, obviously. Randy Gregory sounds like he's coming out. Amir Abdullah, obviously, we've talked about him quite a bit. Anybody else on that Nebraska side you'll be watching?
Yeah, those are the two big ones, and I think Abdullah just accepted a Senior Bowl invitation today. But also keep an eye on wide receiver Kenny Bell. I really think he's an underrated player, and it's probably because he's so lean. He's just a skinny guy, but he makes plays. He's surprisingly tough running after the catch. Beyond that, Corey Cooper as a safety for them, and they have an inside linebacker, Zaire Anderson. Those are both players I would think would be late round undrafted free agent types.
Yeah, and Cooper has a Shrine Game invite, so that'll be an interesting one for
He's a
him
big
to see.
guy. He's pretty solid.
USC, tons of talent. Talked about probably all of them before. Um, I mean, outside of the big names, Leonard Williams, Buck Allen, guys like that, is a guy like Josh Shaw. Can he do enough to kind of help himself from what he did earlier in the year to really hurt himself?
He's got the blessing and the curse of having a very limited amount of tape on him this year. So if he shines out in a game like this, it's going to stand out in comparison to the nothing that he put up early in the season when he was, missing time because of his wild lies. I think Shaw has a lot to gain in this game. But the thing is, Nebraska's passing game isn't the best test for a corner. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. He's got a chance, if he doesn't play well, then he's not playing well against this subpar passing game. So he's probably got more to lose than to gain, just because of the players that I really am interested in this from USC are Buck Allen and Nelson Aguilar, because I expect both of them to declare along with Leonard Williams. Buck Allen, we've talked about him before. He's going to be 24 in August. And Rand Getlin was tweeting last week that he's talking to agents. Aguilar, we've heard, might be a package deal with Leonard Williams as far as with an agent. So two really productive players I think are going to be good at the next level.
What about Hayes Pollard?
He's got some fans in the Twitterverse. Kind of small for my liking, but those small linebackers seem to really get a lot of love in the draft Twitter world for whatever reason. I think because they're in the college game, when like these guys are a little quicker than their competition, and if they play behind a good defensive line, they can fill that gap and make some plays at the line of scrimmage and shine.
Anybody else from this game? I mean, it's a really good matchup, as is the next one that we're going to talk about.
Cody Kessler, I've seen him. Josh Norris, I think, said he would be the third quarterback now in his rankings if he chooses to come out. I just still think Kessler's going back to school next year.
Yeah, he's getting a lot of Barkley type hype at this point. I feel like I don't know how many people remember Barkley's hype as a junior.
Yeah.
So
we like to build him up and break him down.
That's right. Speaking of which, Liberty Bowl, Texas A&M, Cedric Ogbuehi. Is there anybody that can really test him in this game from West Virginia's standpoint?
They've got Shaq Riddick, transfer. He's got potential to challenge Ogbuehi. He's a tall, lean guy. I think he's probably more of an effort player than anything else, but that's probably the main guy they have that could test Ogbuehi.
And then your boo, Kevin White at wide receiver. Does Texas A&M have anybody that can cover him? And the answer is no, but anybody.
No, they don't. DeShazer Everett was the one defensive back that gets hyped for them, but I just don't think he's very good cover guy. So he's a player I think is more of a safety than anything else. No, I think White's going to have kind of a resurgence because he's slumped a little numbers-wise, but that's because West Virginia doesn't really have anybody else that people are scared of.
Heading to the next game, Oklahoma versus Clemson. Another semi-intriguing, not as intriguing as it normally is, but semi-intriguing matchup. Oklahoma has, I don't know, I mean, who are their top prospects coming out this year?
Well, we just found out that I don't know if he's the top guy. Well, the top guys are probably the two tackles, Tyrus Thomas and, oh boy, the guy's name, Darrell Williams. His name escaped me for a second. I know people like Eric Stryker if he declares early, but and then Darrell Green Beckham, who hasn't played for them, but most people seem to expect that he'll declare for the draft anyway. But I was interested to see Blake Bell, the former Belldozer, the quarterback, now at tight end, and has a Shrine Game invite. And I watched him earlier in the year and was really hoping that they would feed Blake Bell the ball just so I could see him catch, and they'd let me down. So maybe this time.
Vic Beasley's the best prospect in this game without a doubt at this point. I think it's going to be a really good test for him because Oklahoma's going to try to run the ball. So Beasley's not going to get to do what he's best at, and that's rush the passer. So I think this will kind of be a game where you can decide on whether you like Beasley in the top 5 versus like the 20. And I'm assuming he's going to get picked in the top 10 just because he can rush the passer. But I think it'll have an impact on a lot of people's grades.
I could see this game having an impact on people's grades because Beasley doesn't get 2 sacks and maybe these tackles with their length give him some difficulties against the run. It's a good opportunity for Stephon Anthony, their inside linebacker, to come up and make some plays. And also Grady Jarrett, the defensive lineman, undersized guy, but he makes some really nice plays getting up the middle. I think he's one of these undersized defensive tackles, 290, 295, who can kind of knife into the backfield and cause some problems. So if guys like Anthony and Jarrett can force the play outside, then Beasley can still make some cleanup plays. So I like this matchup for Clemson because I'm not as high on the Oklahoma tackles as some other people are.
Yeah, and it'll be another chance for them to prove their worth. So it'll be interesting because, Beasley. I mean, that's one thing he can do is he can bend the edge, and so Thompson and Williams will have their work cut out for him. The Texas Bowl, Texas versus Arkansas. Who thought these two programs would be playing in a menial bowl like the Texas Bowl, right? But you have a guy that's looks like he's moved up most people's boards, and I don't think he's declared yet. But Malcolm Brown, the defensive tackle, Malcolm Brown out of Texas. What are your thoughts on him? Is he as good as everybody is hyping him up to be?
Short answer would be no. Long answer would be I haven't seen a ton of Texas this year, but I know some people I really trust, like Jeff Risden is high on Malcolm Brown and thinks that he could be a borderline first round or early second round pick. So it's definitely that type of thing will make me go back and take a look at players. But Brown early in the year just wasn't a player who I expected to leave school early. Now it almost seems like a foregone conclusion that he's going to. So I definitely need to watch this game to see how he shows up and probably a couple more because 6'2", 320-pound guys that former 5-star recruit guys can move, create pressure. Those are valuable players now.
Other guys on the Longhorns defense that'll draw some interest, and they'll be at the Senior Bowl as well. Quandre Diggs and linebacker Jordan Hicks. So secondary or defensive back Quandre Diggs and Jordan Hicks. Um, both seem like day three types right now. What is that? Just because of how poorly Texas has played?
Yeah, I think so. I think Diggs is a player that could move up because he had some momentum when he was younger, freshman sophomore year. Um, then seemed to lose some luster, but I think it's the whole program kind of lost some luster. But right now, I see Diggs. He's a player I like, but I see him as a fourth, fifth round prospect with a chance to move up. But he's got some good size to him. He's a little stockier than a lot of corners. They list him, I think, 5'10", 200, but he can hit, he can defend the pass, so I think there's a role for him. Another guy who doesn't get any mention, but I've seen him make some nice plays in the run game is Steve Edmond, their inside linebacker. I think he projects to an inside linebacker. They kind of move him around, but he's a player to look out for too.
I really like the other Malcolm Brown, running back Malcolm Brown from Texas. I think he's been hampered by a really bad offense, and I think he's one of those guys that's going to come out and be a better college, or excuse me, a better NFL player than he was a college player. But running backs, um, it's almost time just to throw up your hands at this point
Mm-hmm.
with the running back evaluation process because they're so dependent on all the other positions. I was high on like Isaiah Crowell, and you've seen what he's done in the NFL in Cleveland behind a good offensive line. Um, but I wasn't as high on Jeremy Hill. I just went and looked back at my rankings, and despite the fumble tonight, Hill's played really well this year, and I had him at 91. I mean, so I had him as a third-round player, but I think a lot of people kind of laugh at that now. I know people that had him lower and people that had him higher, so it's just one of those things. I think because it's so hard to gauge value of the running back position, that a guy like Malcolm Brown's going to be a hard guy to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, watch him go undrafted and then rush 1,500 yards, become Arian Foster or something like that. I mean, he's a 4 or 5 star recruit, so I know there's people that were at least at one point very high on him, but he just hasn't really got going in that Texas offense. He's stuck around 4 yards a carry, which in college is below average.
Arkansas has a pair of defensive players that are tough to gauge. Trey Flowers is a defensive end at Arkansas, 4-year starter, I believe. Arkansas, and he's just a weirdly built, I guess I'll put it that way, prospect at 6'3". They list him at 270. I think he's bigger. He's a big dude. Can he play defensive end in the NFL, or is he going to have to gain some weight and be another guy that plays from the interior?
He is a weird guy because at his size, you'd like him to be taller, and I'm not sure that he's even 6'3", where they list him at.
Yeah, he'll be 6'1.5" probably when they measure him.
Yeah, so that type of squatty guy, and it's just like their guy last year, Chris Smith. So they have these like short, stumpy but kind of athletic end players. But Flowers is someone that, just because of the way he's built, it's tough for me to wrap my hands around and really figure out what to do with him. I believe he's got a Senior Bowl invite, as Smith did.
Yeah, he and the other prospect, Martell Spate, who's kind of the opposite, 6'2", 230, outside linebacker, undersized guy. They're both talented. They're both very talented players. So you just kind of watch them and what they do. You just have to figure out, in something we talked about last year on the podcast, Justis and I, where do they win and how do they win? And so that's the question here. How's Martell Spate and Trey Flowers going to win at the next level?
Good question.
Anybody else from this game?
Just drop a name, AJ Derby, the tight end from Arkansas. He's a former quarterback from Iowa. So I know he's got a Shrine Game invite too. He's also a prospect on the older side. He'll be a 24-year-old rookie, but worth checking out.
Yeah. So that's all for this week. Whew, there's a lot of games. So I'm going to try to list the times talked about each game, so you can just kind of go to the podcast and click on a time and listen for that day's games and prospects to watch. Because that's a long time to kind of listen through all of these games that are going to happen over a time period. Next week we have kind of the start of the big bowls, and we're going to spend a little more time on those and go in depth. But as we head out of here, anything else? Do you have any hot takes that you want to talk about? I know you've been on vacation, so.
If you want some hot takes, all you have to do is search Johnny Manziel on Twitter, and you will find out that he has already completely flamed out of the league after 1.5 games. But beyond that, we saw some Brandon Bridge hot takes. We talk about that almost on a weekly basis. So, the hottest takes are the takes that are yet to come, because I just can't wait. We're wrapping up these bowl games, and once we get into that next batch, especially when we start doing some combine and some pro days, things will just really light ablaze.
Yep, and things are going to start to take shape here. This is the first kind of entry into a lot of guys. We hit on a ton of guys, but it's not going to be even close to the number of guys you need to know going forward. So it'll be interesting to go from here and see kind of what happens. So enjoy this week. This is probably one of the better weeks of football and prospect watching, because these are the guys that aren't going to get a ton of run, but they're the guys that are going to make up the bulk of the draft and bulk of the outside of a couple games, obviously, that even you start on with that Independence Bowl and then go to the Holiday Bowl and the Liberty Bowl. Those have some really talented players. So, but enjoy those first games and enjoy what's going on. And I appreciate your time as always, Justin. And we'll do this again next week.
Definitely, and everyone have a Merry Christmas. Watch Christmas Vacation, Christmas Story, and my favorite, Die Hard.
Yes, Die Hard, the best Christmas movie. Just ask Justin.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.